I am so glad you convinced me that the family car should be the Defender 110. It is so beautiful inside. It's so comfortable and it just feels indestructible.
Yes, it really is. I've been waiting a long time for the new model to come out. The Defender 110, I'm telling you, it's my favorite car of all times. It's my third one. You know, I have stories of going off-road. The guy managed the group. He was like, what are you doing in this beautiful car? I'm like, I'm going off-road. He's like, are you sure? Because you can use one of ours. And then they look like Mad Max cars. I'm like, no, we're going to do this. And he was shocked.
Wow. Well, it's great because the Defender has been reimagined for 21st century adventure, and its unparalleled off-road ability as well as its robust interior are invaluable whether you're headed towards uncharted territory or just a weekend of exploration. The Defender 110 tackles challenging surroundings with absolute confidence. The SUV conveys strength outside and in, featuring peerless technology like an intuitive driver display and an award-winning infotainment system. That's my favorite part, to keep you connected no matter where the journey takes you. Adventure is unique to everyone, and so is the Defender. Choose from the two-door Defender 90, the four-door Defender 110, or the larger Defender 130 with the ability to seat up to 8 passengers. You'll find uncompromising performance in all three. So pack up and go even further with the Defender 110. Learn more at LandRoverUSA.com/Defender.
These days, we're all investors, trying to be smart with our money despite our worst impulses. But at iShares, we believe that deep down inside of every investor is a better investor. One that's just waiting to be let out. Explore iShares ETFs and insights and let your best investor out. Visit iShares.com for more information.
This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show. Today on the James Altucher Show.
So excited to have this next guest. He is a New York Times bestselling novelist. He has written TV shows. He has written comic books. He's even written games, and he's even written super valuable books about how to write and how to write a great novel. And also he's one of the few people who's written a legit Star Wars novel blessed by the Star Wars franchise. Chuck Wendig is on the podcast, and we're going to talk about all things writing. Chuck, I don't even know how to introduce you. You've had, honestly, my dream career. It's Chuck Wendig. You're best known for a lot of things. I'll talk about 2 of them, but we could talk about all of them.
Sure.
You've won various awards in writing and so on. You've been a science fiction writer. I would say you've been a borderline horror thriller.
Definitely horror, yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely.
horror. And we'll discuss the differences between the different genres.
Yeah, great.
So your science fiction also has focused a lot on Star Wars. You're one of the only authors I know of that have written what's called canon novels, meaning they're approved by the Star Wars franchise, by Disney, to be official, official timeline novels, like to fill in the gaps between Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens. When Disney bought Lucasfilms, and correct me if I'm wrong on anything, they kind of wiped out there was like 100 different Star Wars novels, and Disney basically said, you know what? Those don't exist anymore.
Right. They put them into what they call legends, I think is how they refer to them.
Right. Which is, is another way of saying they're fake.
Yeah. I mean, the good news is it was all fake anyway. It turns out it wasn't real, so it's all good.
Although I still consider some of it like semi-canon, even though they're not. Like, I feel like they could be canon because they haven't been...
If it hasn't been overwritten yet. And some stuff gets pulled into the new stuff anyway because we were all kind of fans of that, and so it gets teased back in.
Right. Like, before the podcast started, we were talking about Darth Plagueis by Jim Lucino, who's also been on the podcast, and nothing's contradicted books like that, or the Rule of Two. Nothing's really contradicted that,
right?
Which came from the Legends books, like Darth Bane and all that. But anyway, you've written actual canon just like The Mandalorian is canon, and also takes place roughly around the same time, maybe a few years later after during your book. So
That's right.
your series is Aftermath, which is like right after, or at least it starts off right after Return of the Jedi. Mandalorian's
Right after,
like
moments. Yeah.
right, and Mandalorian is like, I don't know, like a decade after.
I don't think they've really nailed it down, but something like that.
And then, totally separately but related, I am a huge fan of your blog.
Thank you.
Terrible Minds blog.
Terrible
right?
Minds. Yeah, terribleminds.com. You got it.
And in that you talk about the art and practice of writing. And what I love, and I think you've only been doing this in the past year, you've also been interviewing other science fiction writers, and particularly newer science fiction writers, about 5 things they learned writing their recent book. And I just love that series of blog posts because I've learned so much, whether it's horror, science fiction, young adult, whatever. They all give really excellent insight. And then I really like your nonfiction books about writing. I would say, I'm going to go to your Amazon page right now because you've written so many books. I would say
I should stop. Honestly, I should quit while I'm ahead.
no, I don't think so. I hope you don't. But I would say two of the best books on writing I've ever read, and there's lots of books about writing and that are very good. But The Kick-Ass Writer, 1001 Ways to The Kick-Ass Writer, 1001 Ways to Write Great Fiction, Get Published, and Earn Your Audience, I think is just every writer has to read this book.
Thank
you. You address so many issues, and you encourage the reader to ask so many questions about who they are, what their objectives are, and it really gets to the point of how writing is just as much psychological, like what's inside of you, as it is creative and developing the muscles of creativity. We're going to talk about that book. And also, I don't know if you consider this on your top list of your favorite books that you've written, but I really like Damn Fine Story, Mastering the Tools of Power.
I actually prefer that to The Kick-Ass Writer. Kick-Ass Writer was just really pulled from the blog, almost word for word. So it wasn't really focused. It was just sort of this like little bits and bites of, tips and tricks. But Damn Fine Story had more of a kind of an ethos behind it, and I think it overall holds together better because it was meant to hold better together at the outset.
Right, because I feel like, so just like, I think a lot of writers use as a template or a skeleton, Joseph Campbell's arc of the hero. And in fact, just talking about Star Wars, everybody always breaks down Star Wars in terms of Campbell's, the hero's journey. And I think you take it like one step further in terms of analyzing story structure when you talk about what Freytag's pyramid and the relationships between characters and all this kind of stuff, which I think, again, it's a good companion to The Kick-Ass Writer, because The Kick-Ass Writer forces one to ask the questions that follow kind of the philosophy you describe in Damn Fine Story.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, hopefully they play well together.
So I want to talk about those because you give really great advice. But just real quickly, you've done every kind of writing. You've written for comic books. You've written all these different genres. I just want to get some background. Like, how'd you get started?
That origin story stuff. I was, I obviously wanted to be a writer from very early age, and I didn't know how to do that. And I was trying to write books, novels, and I was failing at doing so. I was chasing the wrong idea for what, my book should be. I was trying to chase what I thought the market would want. I was trying to chase what I thought other writers would do. It just wasn't working out. And so in the meantime, then I wrote, I used to play pen and paper role-playing games, stuff like D&D, but in this case, some horror games by a company called White Wolf Game Studios. And I thought, well, if I'm going to be doing this kind of foolish pastime where I'm, gaming with buddies and slinging some dice on a table, what if I could also get paid to do that? And so I applied for a freelancer assignment at White Wolf. And you had to write like 1,000 words as to what this game meant to you, this game, monster hunting game. And I knew they were kind of a little pretentious, so I wrote a sort of pretentious 1,000-word essay about the internal and external loci of fear, and it was sort of, and it worked. Somehow it worked. I totally bullshitted my way into that job. And from there, I just kept getting assignments because I would do the work quickly and I would do the work cleanly. I don't know if it was any good, but I did the job. And so they kept bringing me back, which was great. So I did that for about 10 years, and I was still failing to meaningfully write books. I had one novel that I would get about 75% of the way through. And it was sort of one of those books where if you've ever walked into a room and you've forgotten why you've gone into that room, it was that book. I would get about 75% through, and I was like, I don't know what I'm doing here. It's sort of like, really, I have no purpose in this book. I can't bring it home. So I always joke that I did what any novelist at that point would do, which is I won a screenwriting competition. And in the screenwriting competition, the prize was a mentorship with a screenwriter, a known screenwriter guy who had written the Grudge films and a few other adaptations. And that was actually his expertise was on adapting pre-existing material from the page to the screen. And so I really was like, I even told him early on, I was like, I just want you to help me adapt my piece of shit novel that's unfinished to a screenplay. And I'm just going to use the screenplay as an outline to get to the next novel. Like, I just want to finish this as a novel, and I'm going to use the screenplay as an outline. So you're going to help me do that. And he was like, yeah, okay. I mean, sure. So he kind of helped me get to that point. And not only then did that help me clarify my novel writing process, and it was actually the first book that I sold, the one that resulted from that. But then I ended up also finding a writing partner and a guy named Lance Weiler, and we wrote a bunch of digital sort of film stuff, and we had we had a script that got us to the Sundance Screenwriters Lab, and then the following year we had a short film at Sundance, which was pretty exciting. So it was kind of it's just been a sort of a janky zigzag of a career, but I think that's often true for writers.
Well, let me ask you about the game writing, because this is the one format I'm really unfamiliar with. Like, what does it mean and these are role-playing games, they're not computer games. What does it mean to write a game?
Yeah, that's the weird question, isn't it? So if you're writing a book or a film, but I mean really a book, like let's talk about a book as a sort of an object. It's an object of ego, because I'm saying, like, as a storyteller, this thing matters. It's my narrative, and I'm going to put it all in here in this 300 to 800 pages. And I think it's important enough and interesting enough that someone will buy it and read through those considerable pages. Whereas a game is sort of the opposite. You're there trying to write rules and narrative materials, almost like narrative Lego bricks. I'm trying to upend that toy box for you and saying, look at all these toys, and you can use these things to tell your own story. So it's almost in the opposite of that. It's taking away the ego. It's like trying to put those tools and those skills in the hands of sort of nascent, burgeoning storytellers at the game table, and just so they can have fun. So it's really it was a big shift for me to change from game writing to more focused narrative stuff. It kind of broke my brain for a little while.
Do you think that game writing helped you later on with world building in science fiction? So a key skill for science fiction is you're not on Earth in many cases, and you have to literally build the world and make a realistic world that says that readers could come in and say, okay, this is not a fake world. This is not the Truman Show. This is like a real planet with history and people and civilization. So it has to feel like the Earth, but it's not.
Right, but it wasn't game writing that taught me that. It was actually just gaming itself, because at the game table, and actually teaches you a lot about storytelling. Because when you're at the game table and you're running a game as whether it's a dungeon master or a storyteller or a game master, however the game refers to it, it's your job to keep everyone entertained, right? And to let them have these characters and to create moments for those characters that are engaging and surprising and terrifying and sad or happy or whatever it is. So, with world building, you can't sit there and go on and on about like every sconce and every, tapestry. You've got to like cut to the chase, because people they're staring at you. They're trying to like get this story going. And if you waste too much time with world building, you're going to bore the hell out of them, and they're going to, not come back for the next session. So, and I think that's true in novels as well. You're really trying to give them what they need to move the story forward. You're not trying to overwhelm them with, rich texture and details, if they don't need that. Because for me, that's just, you run the risk of really boring them and kicking them out of the story.
Yeah, I think, it's funny with novels, I always feel most strongly about a book if there's purpose to writing so descriptively and with such, powerful metaphors and so on. Like, contrast something like The Old Man and the Sea, by Hemingway, with Gravity's Rainbow by Pynchon.
Oh, yeah.
In Old Man and the Sea, if he used overly descriptive language or metaphors, it wouldn't make sense, because it's roughly from the point of view of an old man who's been fishing for 70 years.
Right.
So it wouldn't be like this guy would have a big vocabulary. In fact, Old Man and the Sea is written at a fourth grade reading level, and yet it was powerful enough to catapult Hemingway to the Nobel Prize. So, I think that's an important part of writing skill, is matching the structure of the language itself with the plot of the novel.
Yeah, and genre and the needs of the audience and what the audience's expectations might be because of the genre, because of the stories you're telling.
Right, like take John Grisham as an example. For all we know, he could be, the best, writer of language ever, but that wouldn't fit in the context of a legal thriller. He has to just basically go from plot point to plot point. And I'm oversimplifying, but it wouldn't make sense for him to write a very poetic legal thriller.
Then now I want to see him try.
Yeah.
I'm curious what a poetic legal thriller looks like.
Right. So what separated your first published novel, which I have to say I haven't read, it's Double Dead.
Yeah, technically that's a work for hire book. No, Blackbirds is my first original actual fiction.
Okay, so what separated that from like earlier books where you felt like you just weren't connecting with the story?
Blackbirds, I stopped kind of giving as much of a damn about it. Like it sounds strange, but you care a lot about the things you write. And sometimes you can care too much. I always say that, even autonomous behaviors are difficult if you overthink them. Like, if I think about breathing or if I think about sleeping, I can guarantee you I'm going to have trouble breathing or trouble sleeping if I'm thinking about them. And writing is that way too. Sometimes if you think too hard about it, it becomes a thing. That's kind of how you get, or one of the ways you can get really jammed up on it. So Blackbirds, I had so many tries and so many kind of misses on what I thought was a good book. I wasn't really writing my books. And so with Blackbirds, I was like, well, I don't care anymore. I don't think I'm really ever going to get published. And I want to write the book that I want to write. It's my turn now. I'm not going to worry about the market. I'm not going to worry about expectations for agents or editors or whatever. And I just sort of threw it all at the wall. And I broke a lot of the rules and things you weren't supposed to do. And I just was like, well, screw it. To hell with it. And turns out that was the right way to go. And it sort of became the ethos behind some of my writing going forward was, not to say you don't have to think about an audience and not to say you don't have to think about a market at all, but you're really best starting on that first foot of accepting your own self as the first audience and just being like, what's the story I want to tell? Obviously, like, the world is full of books. It doesn't need any more, really. In the grand scheme of things, we could all have enough books right now to read until the end of our lives without ever having any more made. So if I'm going to do this, why would I do that? And it's because I want, there's something I feel is missing, or there's something like I feel like I have a thing I want to talk about or tell.
Oh, I want to write that down. Well, I'm sorry. What was that last thing? It was so good.
I don't even know.
Yeah. All right. I'll listen to it.
Everybody write that down.
It's basically why. Like, why would you? It's very important, this notion, and I think people need to understand this, that you have to say something different. Yep. Like you just said, there's a billion books already. There's 2 million books were published last year. So you kind of have to add something new.
Yeah.
To basically say, this is why someone should read this, is because it's new.
And the other thing is, what I think also writers, they can get hung up so much on things being original, right? This needs to be new and original, when realistically there are no new or original stories, but what there is something that has never before existed, which is the author. That author is a weird confluence of ideas and experiences from birth to that point where that novel is written. And that is the fingerprint. And I don't mean that every writer is a special precious snowflake, but I do mean like you are your own person and no one else can be you. So even if you try to retell an old existing story, as long as you open those floodgates, it sounds cheesy, but if you sort of like open up the stuff inside of you and you put who you are on the page and all of the things that make you, then it is guaranteed to be a new and original thing, because it's a perspective no one else can possibly have because it's yours.
I really believe that, because, so my own writing kind of comes out of, I used to write about financial stuff a lot. So I would write for the Financial Times, the Wall Street Journal, and I was writing articles every day. And there would be a little bit of personality in there, but, it'd be mostly about kind of things that were happening in the world and my interpretation of them. But I would see other writers who they just had too much ego in the writing. They would talk about their achievements, their accomplishments, and have that veer into their interpretations of financial events. And I feel like when you open yourself up and find your flaws and your fears and your vulnerabilities as well, then that's really what people relate to in characters, even whether you're writing nonfiction or fiction, because in a nonfiction, the character could be me if it's a narrative nonfiction. And I think you do that by saying what's bothering you in this situation.
Right, yeah, and taking ego out of it and sort of accepting a lot of those flaws and frailties and, anxieties. God, every book I write is like a blender of whatever anxieties I've got going on right there, and it's just a smoothie of those fears and concerns.
And so, like in Blackbird, this is about a girl who, and I feel like you started with the concept. So, like, what would be like every person you touch, you see their eventual, you see exactly what their eventual death would look like. That's such a great concept, and like you said, no story is new. I bet you millions of people maybe have had that concept. But you start with this concept, and why did you give that power to a young girl?
I don't know precisely why. It just felt like that's who the voice belonged to. Someone who was a little more vulnerable, who was sort of out hanging, loose like a tooth without the enamel. She's just out on the road and has no home and has her mother has forsaken her and she's just lost. And I thought, it was interesting to see her evolve from that person to a person of more power and a person of more understanding and, still sort of accomplish what she was trying to accomplish. And become a person who's a little less selfish, too. She starts out as this sort of selfish, almost vicious person, and the book sort of humanizes her, despite her going deeper and deeper into this sort of supernatural thing.
So for you, what does a book look like at the outset? Like, so you've already discussed, for instance, in this book, there was a concept. What type of person does this concept best fit? And then obviously there's got to be a story, a plot that moves forward, and the character also has to move forward. Are those like kind of the basic elements of the book?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of actual process, like very early on when I had that mentorship with the screenwriter with Steven Susko, one of the first things he said was like, "Well, you're going to need to outline." And I was like, "Oh no, I don't do that. I don't outline. That's stupid. I don't like maybe in Hollywood you have to outline, but like in us novelists, we listen to the galloping of horses on the distance, and we talk to trees. Like what the sycamores say, and that's my novel." And he's like, "No, yeah, well, how's that working out for you?" So I at that point did sort of hunker down over the course of a few days and banged out an actual outline, and it was miserable work, but at the end of the outline, I had a story where I didn't before that. Before then I was trying to write this book and it would unspool, halfway or 75% through. And then now I had like a clear line to an ending. So I learned mostly for me that I needed to outline, but some people take that story and assume that also means they need to outline. But really the lesson of the story is that my process wasn't working. So I needed to change my process.
What are the elements of a good outline?
I have no idea. Every outline I write is a completely different being, and it depends on if, the publisher or someone needs to read it, or if it's just for me. If it's just for me, it's not fit for human consumption. It's a chaos manifesto. But if it's for them, then it's a little more proper, synopsis of the story.
But I always figure, so an outline has to have kind of all the typical beats of a story that readers are prepared for, publishers are prepared for, editors are prepared for. So whether that's the arc of the hero or other models, it's got to have those beats. But then also it has to have, what you've spoken about and what every writer's spoken about is, the character has to move forward or accomplish, has to want something every step of the way. And, the plot changes whether they get or do not get what they want. But I always also feel writing is a little bit of a magic trick.
Yeah.
And you have to surprise at least twice. Mm-hmm. You have to pull the rabbit out of the hat and everyone claps. And then you have to do something else that is like, wow, I didn't see that coming.
Yeah, the rabbit has to become a hat again or something. Yeah, something.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, there's always tricks to it. And, sometimes those tricks are ones you don't even plan for. That's the cool part when that happens, is that's when the magic trick stops feeling like a magic trick and feels like a little more old world magic, like real magic spell sorcery kind of stuff, even though it's not. If you line up these characters and you give them things they want and you give them problems and you give them a solution to those problems, but a solution that they can't achieve easily without obstacles and fears and dangers in their way. And you line up other characters to do the same, and they all kind of march toward each other in the labyrinth, and then you end up with, like I said, something unexpected. And that magic, both the trick and the sorcery, live in where it's unexpected. And sometimes you are marching along, even if it's according to an outline or not, you march along and you discover something you didn't decide would go in there. And it's just like the tumblers in a lock suddenly click and a door opens, and that's the new story.
And the danger of surprise, though, is that it could be too much of a surprise. So people are like, oh, he just put that in. It takes the reader out of the story.
Just to be shocking. Yeah. So you need to line it. You need to be the type of thing that when the surprise hits, they have to see, like, oh, I should have seen this coming. Or they could have seen it coming. That's also fine, too. Sometimes readers want to see something coming. But always, if you can always give them just a little extra turn of the knife, too, is always a thing. But that's the key of making it organic. Because you hate watching like a movie or a TV show or reading a book, and a character does something inconsistent with what you know of them, and it only feels like it's there to move forward the plot. And it's why I think you don't really start with plot as in like an external structure. You start with plot in the way that just as human beings make up history, right? History is not a thing that happens to us. It's a thing that we make happen. Plot is not a thing that happens to characters, but it's a thing that they are making happen. They're worms chewing dirt, and you really sort of want them to have that agency in the story. And if they have agency and they act according to it, hopefully the surprises you bring are organic and true.
Like what's an example where on a book you've written where you're particularly proud of the surprise?
Oh, that's a good one. Wanderers is, I won't spoil the surprises, but I wrote Wanderers almost like it was a series, a full television series in a single book. So like every, part in the book, which is multiple chapters sort of broken out, I treated like a season of television. And so just as every season of television leaves you with those like sort of those moments where the story has changed and you've pivoted in a way that's shocking and you've revealed new information and it's forced the characters into a new realm. Every part ends with that. I really try to orchestrate another turn of the knife. So, it keeps everybody guessing and the mystery is compelling and it forces you to the next page, hopefully.
And in terms of what's a TV series, for instance, that you've loved over the past 20 years? Because I sort of have this theory that there's a golden age of television that essentially started around 2004 and probably ended around 2015. And if you think about all the great series like Breaking Bad, Mad Men, maybe The Wire, Lost, and on, they're all between those times where there was huge budgets allowed for series. It's the period when seasons became, full arcs of a story as opposed to each episode being standalone. And it's before this time we're in now where there's so many shows out there that it's a little harder. Let's say the average writing quality has gone a little bit down, even though there's still good shows. But like, what's a good series where you can point to a surprise that felt right for you, and also difficult in the sense that the writer had to keep fooling the reader into not knowing the surprise would happen and yet lay the clues for it?
Yeah, Breaking Bad's a good one. Avatar: The Last Airbender is a good one. There's some good twists in there. There's a show that's out now on Netflix, another cartoon called Kipo and the Age of Wonder Beasts, and it does a lot of really fun stuff with, again, every end of every season, it's twisting your expectations, and she's a character who is relentlessly optimistic, and so that drive of hers to essentially make friends with every villain who pursues her makes for a very interesting story and unexpected, because that is not traditionally how we see our protagonists, especially in a sort of action-y, heroic cartoon. It's always like defeat the evil, defeat the bad guys. And It's just not really how it works in that story, and it constantly upends your expectations as to what's going to happen next because of that.
Well, so in Breaking Bad, what would you say were like the obvious thing in Breaking Bad was you realize it's not just to make money for his family,
It's
what
who
he's
he
doing.
is. Yeah.
Yeah, it's who he is, and he becomes closer and closer to that until it's like full circle.
Right. But there's also
what's-
even like if you want a shock moment when when Gus Fring walks out and then half his body is gone.
Oh my God, that was great.
Right, yeah, that's just a good sort of a visceral shock moment in that story.
And even when Gus Fring is revealed to be Gus Fring,
Right.
That was an interesting moment because at first it looks like he's just like a manager of this chicken place, and then it turns out he's the mastermind.
He's the mastermind, yeah.
Yeah, and so you could have guessed, but you wouldn't have known, but it makes sense once it's known.
Yes, precisely.
So that's it, because I always think that's the difficulty because you know the surprise so well as you're writing it, but you have to almost pretend like you don't know because you have to make sure you have to ask yourself, what's the reader feeling at this point?
Well, that's
or maybe
why
you don't. I don't know.
The really wonderful ones are the ones, as I said, you didn't plan for. Because then if you didn't plan for it and you find something, something I try to do whenever I'm writing, I always say, well, I'm planning on writing it this way, but what if it goes this way instead? And sometimes when you do that, because if you surprise yourself, you can be fairly sure that you're going to be surprising the reader as well.
So, I want to just real quickly touch on what's the difference between the different genres. Like, what would you say is the difference between what makes a horror novel?
Well, see, that's one of those tricky questions because genre is just sort of some nonsense we made up. Like it's a marketing category, really, at the end of the day.
Right.
And the sort of the breakdown in genres doesn't always make sense if you believe them to be rigid. Because like science fiction and fantasy can tell the exact same stories, but it's all about setting, time period and setting. Science fiction requires obviously to be more science-based, and if it's in space, it's probably science fiction. If it's in the future, it's probably science fiction. Fantasy tends to be more like, there's going to be some dragons or an unusual realm or portals or whatever it's going to be. You can mix them and merge them, but generally speaking, they're based on setting and time frame. And horror is all about emotion, and mystery is all about emotion. So while you certainly have tropes and sort of things that earmark them, there's no reason you can't have a horror fantasy or a horror science fiction. Wanderers is certainly what I would consider a science fiction horror novel. There's no reason you can't have a mystery set in a fantasy. In fact, many novels are mysteries by their sort of very nature. Many novels are kind of horror novels. They have moments of terror and horror, and certainly they have mysteries baked into them because that's what keeps people reading. So the more we break out the genres, the more you start to see that they're not really on even footing as to what their differences are, which makes it interesting as long as you don't find them rigorous rule books as to what you need to cleave to.
This is such a valuable service for all business owners, big businesses, small businesses, doesn't matter. I wish I had this in the many different businesses that I've started. Sometimes it seems like your business is humming, but then suddenly you don't understand it. You're starting to fall behind. You're not understanding where your costs are, where your revenues are, where your payments are. Teams are buried in all sorts of like BS work, and you can't seem to close the books. So you need like one dashboard, one source of truth. I'm jealous of this business, NetSuite from Oracle, of course, NetSuite by Oracle. I wish I'd come up with this idea. It's a brilliant concept to have all your business intelligence on one dashboard. This is why you need to know these three numbers: 37,000, 25, and 1. So 37,000, that's the number of businesses which have upgraded to NetSuite by Oracle. NetSuite is the #1 cloud financial system, streamlining accounting, financial management, inventory, HR, and more. 25. NetSuite turns 25 this year. That's 25 years of helping businesses do more with less, close their books in days, not weeks, and drive down costs. 1,
because your business is one of a kind. So you get a customized solution for all of your key performance indicators, your KPIs, in one efficient system with one source of truth. Manage risk, get reliable forecasts, and improve margins. Everything you need to grow all in one place. So right now, download NetSuite's popular KPI checklist designed to give you consistently excellent performance absolutely free at netsuite.com/James. That's netsuite.com/James to get your own KPI checklist. netsuite.com/James. You know what I love about fantasy sports is that even though I'm not going to be a great basketball player or a baseball player or a football player or whatever, I feel like I get to participate and make decisions and use my knowledge of these different leagues or these different sports to compete. So it's like I can pick my team or I can pick my favorite players and I could use my knowledge to make predictions and maybe even make money. So with the basketball season here, you can now pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League on Prize Picks. This is a league created specifically for combo projections that include two or more players from different sports or leagues. Want to play alongside some of Prize Picks' favorite players like rapper Meek Mill and comedian Andrew Schultz, who's also been a guest on this podcast, and I've been a guest on his? You can now find community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries for some of the biggest names in the Prize Picks community each week. Look, Prize Picks even offers a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. What? So, I love playing it. I love anywhere where I can use analytical ability with my interests to demonstrate some skill and maybe make some money. And I like the game-like aspect. I do wish they had chess as a category on prizepicks.com, but I'll settle for what they've got. Maybe I should make my own fantasy chess league. But in any case, I love Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/James. Use code James for a first deposit match up to $100. That's the easiest $100 you're ever going to make. So that's prizepicks.com/James and use code James. Daily fantasy sports made easy. The future of learning is definitely online. Like, it's such BS that you have to spend $200,000 or take $200,000 in loans and go to some fancy school when it's useless. It doesn't guarantee you a job. Most employers, including me, do not care about degrees or grades or anything like that. We want to care that you love what you're doing, that you know what you're doing, in some cases that you have experience or that you're willing to learn. But people in general love learning and are curious. Like, the key to success is curiosity. And I think masterclass.com is the perfect model for online learning. I'm really happy they're sponsoring this episode. If you're going to give a gift, give the gift of learning. Masterclass makes a meaningful gift this season for you and anyone on your list, because both of you can learn from the best to become your best, from leadership to effective communication to cooking. Let me tell you some of the classes I've taken. I've taken comedy from Steve Martin. I mean, can you believe I can take a class from Steve Martin on comedy, or Judd Apatow, my favorite comedy director? I could take an actual class from him on writing. Wolfgang Puck on cooking. Dan Brown on writing, or Judy Bloom, who's been on this podcast, on writing. By the way, Wolfgang Puck also has been on this podcast. It's such a pleasure. I try to take classes all the time from masterclass.com. And whether you're watching Masterclass on TV or listening in audio mode in the app or on their site, the quality speaks for itself. It's like these Masterclass instructors are your own personal mentors that are going to help you reach the next level. How much would it cost to take one-on-one classes on comedy from Steve Martin or on chess from Gary Kasparov? You just wouldn't be able to do it. But it would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. With a Masterclass annual membership, it's $10 a month. Memberships start at $120 a year for unlimited access to one-on-one classes with all 180 plus Masterclass instructors. So it's not just $120 for one instructor. You get all 180 plus masterclass instructors. Boost your confidence and find practical takeaways you can apply to your life and at work. And if you own a business or are a team leader, use Masterclass to empower and create future-ready employees and leaders. That's the real education in today's world. So this holiday season, you can give one annual membership and get one free at masterclass.com/JAS. JAS, of course, stands for the James Altucher Show. So right now you can get 2 memberships for the price of one at masterclass.com/JAS. Masterclass.com/JAS. Offer terms apply.
I like your comment in Kick-Ass Writer that beginnings are for assholes.
Yeah.
Describe what that means, because I think this is very interesting, and I think beginnings hold back a lot of writers.
Yeah, it's that whole like, oh, we're going to start a new comic book series / movie, and so we need to start when they get their powers, and it's the same thing every time. Like origin stories, not to say you cannot do a good origin story well. You could do anything well. Anything that people might not think would work or should exist can be done well. But a lot of origin stories and a lot of beginnings contain information that is essentially unessential, right? It's like you're kind of just spinning your tires, doing this sort of rote, well, this is how the person became to be who they are. And you can, most times, especially a really good writer, you can start, 25% in and just cut off all that stuff and just sum it up in a paragraph or two, and everyone gets it. Like there's no, make it more vibrant and more present, as opposed to this like kind of like, I get it, like we were all born, we're all kids at one day. Like we don't need the origin story for every little thing, and it's why prequel stories are so dangerous. It's not to say a prequel is again automatically bad, but you're so first of all, you're narrow. You have a narrow narrative that can only end where the next story already began. You can't change anything. So the story is essentially written, and it feels like to the audience that this stuff is destined, as opposed to the way stories should feel, which is loose and uncertain and dangerous. And it no longer feels that way because like we know where we're going. We've seen the bullseye. We already know the dart hits it. So now we just have to watch the dart in flight. And the prequel is just watching a dart in flight. And it's not that interesting. And so you run the risk of telling these sort of rote beginning. And, with the Star Wars prequels or other prequels, it's always like, well, how did this character get that special gun, or why do they wear those pants all the time? And it becomes just an accumulation of trivia, just this sort of we're just trying to hit the menu of like, what do the fans want to see? Well, they want to see why he has his special catchphrase, so let's write a whole scene that's about his special catchphrase. And it becomes just a way to kind of make money and waste time, and it feels a little
Yeah, like Star Wars, you do get this sense that we've been plopped down in the middle of a story.
Yeah.
Like there's references to Luke's father. There's this weird old guy, Ben Kenobi,
Right.
who has this whole backstory. There's this guy in this black suit, Darth Vader. Who the hell is he? And you never really know the origins of these things, at least in that initial first movie, Star Wars.
Yeah. They start you in the middle, and it feels great.
Yeah, that's interesting. So when you're doing an outline, you have to have some sense of what kind of the origin stories are of all the characters, but does that take place in your outline, or are you just starting with, okay, here's scene 1, here's scene 2, and so on?
It can start in the outline. Again, if it's just for me, it may or may not be in there. Sometimes I'll just do documents about characters and not really about plot. But it doesn't, just because I'm talking about it in the outline is not an indication that that's where I will begin the story.
And when you make this outline, you've also referred to how sometimes the story can go in other ways.
Mm-hmm.
Is that okay with the outline? Are you going to say, okay, the outline's now out the window, or I've got to rewrite?
Essential. It's essential to the outline. Every good outline is a document of lies, and I'm all for that. Like it's like driving across country. If I find a cool exit to take, or I find that one highway is closed, that's the journey.
And so, but like, what if you're writing the book and you realize, oh, there's this better direction to go than what I said in the outline?
Well, you go in it, and that's how it goes.
Do you rewrite the outline then?
No, well, I have, but generally not. No, generally I'll, you kind of start to veer, and sometimes you'll come back to the outline because you'll see a way to make it all line up, and sometimes you'll just be like, well, we're in uncharted waters now, and we'll see where we go. And if your characters are true and you know who they are, it tends to still move in the direction.
So in the book Dan Fine's story, you talk about Freytag's pyramid, which is named after this 1800s German playwright.
Right.
And again, it's like almost a different way of looking at Joseph Campbell's the hero's journey, but this is the one that's attractive to you in terms of how you think about story.
Not necessarily attractive to me. It's just it's the sort of proto model. I think there's a lot of value in leaving that model. Like you start there. It's like training wheels on a bike. Like you kind of start there, but then you realize you don't need it as you go on. It's just a very simple mechanism to understand the rise and fall of sort of narrative. But generally speaking, good stories are way squirmier than that, what they call the sort of male ejaculatory arc of just like up and down again.
Yeah, so let's talk about that, because let's talk about Freytag's pyramid and then how it gets a little messy in between. So Freytag basically says there's 7 steps. There's exposition, inciting incident, rising action, climax, falling action, resolution, denouement. So I don't really understand what most of those things mean, at least at first glance.
Yeah.
Like exposition sounds almost like prequel.
Yeah, it's information. That's what it is. It's just information. But exposition exists all throughout, realistically.
And then inciting incident would be like
something's happened. Yeah.
Right, like Luke's aunt and uncle die in Star Wars.
Yeah. But the thing is also stories are full of inciting incidents. My preferred way to look at it is that there's a status quo, right, that exists before the story begins. And the story begins when something has changed the status quo. And then good stories keep settling and then changing the status quo. They keep creating a new normal and then shattering it again. I mean, you can see that throughout Star Wars, that this constant sense of, especially with the, moving into The Empire Strikes Back, the expected, arc of someone like, Han, who's going to pay off his debts and screw over the rebellion. He keeps sort of changing that and keeps coming back. And Luke, you think Luke is this boy who wants to go destroy the Empire, but to vindicate his father's death. But of course, the reality is that Darth Vader is his father. Sorry, spoilers, everybody. But so they just keep twisting those, upending. Every time you think like I'm on stable ground here, someone gets underneath you and makes you fall over again. And that's usually a good when it comes to narrative, as long as it's not too often. You can't change the status quo every 10 minutes.
Well, what do you think of this idea? It's almost like a cliche, which is that if you get stuck searching around for an inciting incident or another incident to kind of change the status quo, you just kill someone.
You can, yeah. I mean, and that can work, especially in certain models of story. That can totally work. It can also, be like a Band-Aid over a chest wound. You might actually have a bigger problem in the narrative. If you don't know what to do next, it might mean there's something earlier on that you need to fix. You need to kind of course correct earlier in the story to get you to where you need to be. But when in doubt, blow something up or kill somebody or find something dramatic and interesting that would shake it up a little bit.
Yeah, and like for instance, and I love taking Star Wars as an example because it feels to me like A, most people are aware of the story, and B, it seems very classic of the arc of how many stories are.
Right.
So like for instance, Star Wars, almost the entire the first half of Star Wars is almost like a movie unto itself, where they're trying to save Princess Leia, who's a prisoner in the Death Star, and some things are to further the plot, like the initial planet they're going to blows up, and now they're being locked into the tractor beam of the Death Star. But sometimes I always wonder when there's an action scene, okay, now all the stormtroopers are chasing, Luke and Han and Leia, and there's guns firing back and forth. How do you make that not rote? Or like in the Bourne Identity or some story like that? How do you make a car chase or a fight scene not the same car chase I've seen in every other movie?
Yeah, I mean, it's a mix of creating stakes, like we, as long as we, the audience, know what is to be gained and lost, gained if they win and lost if they fail. That gives us stakes and it gives us tension. There's also the aspect of, like, again, that status quo thing. You're, especially in an action scene or sequence, you're trying to constantly, you can always see it and you can sort of map it out, whether in Star Wars or Fast and Furious or wherever you're seeing it. You can see the thing where the hero starts to pull ahead and then all is lost and they're knocked back behind again. Just as they think they're gaining the upper hand, they're knocked to the ground, and there's this constant push or pull. So every time you think you know what the scene is trying to do and how you see it's balancing out, they imbalance it again. It just unbalances. So, for me, it's just that sort of magic trick of, like, constantly, it's misdirection. I'll look over here and then I'm doing something over here. There's a lot of little, like, tricks you're just trying to, but you're mostly just trying to keep it interesting. Keep those stakes fresh and keep people, on their toes as to what's coming.
Yeah. So like, let's say you're driving people towards a climax. It always seems like there's a climax and then it starts over. So, like, they save Leia and you feel this huge sigh of relief, but now
but they're trapped. Yeah, but they're trapped. So now it's like they're close to getting her because they thought they've got her free, but now they're pinned in and they've got to go into a sewer, and in the sewer there's a monster, and not only the monster but the crushing walls. Yeah, you just sort of, like, ratcheting those. It's like you could feel like someone tightening a screw, and you're almost, like, close to home. It's like, it's like racing home for an appointment or something. Like, I got to be home by 5:00, and you're like, it's 4:58, I'm almost there, and then ahead it's just all brake lights, and you're like, and it's that kind of, like, that tension and frustration over, like, we're almost home free, and now I don't know that we're going to make it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I never thought of it that way. It's even in kind of chase scenes or these action sequences, it's like this rising and falling tension. So, like, when they save Leia or they get her out of her prison cell, and then they find and everybody's shooting at them, but they find, like, this exit, and the audience almost breathes this huge sigh of relief, and then a few seconds later, the walls start closing in.
Yep. Yeah, and that's a good metaphor for a lot of the scenes. The walls start closing in.
Yeah,
except there is literal.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And then even at the final, so then they save Leia, they bring her back home, but then the stakes get raised again, which is that the Death Star is going to blow up their whole planet.
Yep.
And now it begins again, where everybody's got to make decisions. Like you said with Han Solo, he's got to make a decision. Luke's got to make a decision, and then they figured out a plan. So you feel, relief. They have a plan for destroying the Death Star, but the plan's not going so well.
Yeah, right.
So now it pulls back. So it's that rise and fall again.
Yeah, and then you need the sort of the chaos of the character's convictions to sort of bring it home. Luke has to trust in the Force, and Han has to put aside his debts and his selfish nature and come save him. And so it's like a neat kind of, that push and pull is always great.
Yeah, I like that phrase, the chaos of the character's convictions.
Because characters mess everything up. That's the great thing about characters, right? Like, you have the plot is going this way, but then the characters always want what they want, and they need to do what they need to do, and they are who they are. And, each one is like a Molotov cocktail thrown into the mess, and you never really know. If you let that happen as a storyteller, that's often the most interesting thing.
Yeah, because it's interesting. So Luke, he at first, and I know we're going into the weeds of Star Wars, but most people have either read it or they know about it or they can appreciate it. But Luke at first doesn't want to, pull up, get rid of his equipment to see the right spot to fire. He, like, rejects that. He wants. That's the status quo. We've got all this machinery. We got all this equipment. It's going to tell him the right moment. He has to trust basically this mythological thing. It's like someone saying, "I'm not going to go for surgery. I'm just going to trust in Jesus or whatever."
Exactly. Yeah.
But then you realize almost like, and maybe I just realized it right now, is that the whole story is him seeing glimpses that this idea of the Force is more and more real than he thought.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what is able to convince him to trust this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's his instincts and his, he's finally accepting something about himself in the world at that moment.
Well, what does it mean, the final part of the arc of the hero, where, after the climax, after things kind of end, Joseph Campbell basically says the hero goes back to tell his story.
Yeah, the hero returns. Yeah, and he returns with whatever he returns with, either the prize or the prize is destroyed or whatever it is he returns to tell. He returns changed, and he comes to tell the tale. So that's always the interesting part, is that sort of denouement, kind of wrapping it all up and seeing what it's done to them. I mean, I always like those parts of the book where you learn how the characters have been changed, either for the better or worse. Sometimes both, usually both, at the end of it.
Yeah, and it's interesting, again, like comparing Star Wars with, let's say, Breaking Bad. And with Breaking Bad, I won't reveal any spoilers, but Star Wars is just sort of a simple, he comes back and gets a medal, and for all we know, that's the end of the entire story.
It could be it.
And with Breaking Bad, though, it really his coming back leads to, because of his new realizations, it really leads to a whole new set of action sequences and fear and so on.
Right. Yeah, and it's more complicated because that's a more emotionally mature, crunchier sort of narrative. And he's not even the hero. I mean, he's the protagonist. He's the agent of change. But he's certainly not the hero. And so when you get into those sort of deeper briar tangle of who those characters are, you can do usually more interesting things. Something, Star Wars, and no shade on Star Wars, obviously, is a little more chocolate vanilla. You know what I mean? It's like you can mess with those flavors a little bit, and you can, I can make this chocolate a little darker, or I can, make this sort of a more exotic vanilla. But you're kind of getting those two core flavors, and it's the true thing too with the Campbellian monomyth is that's really like your chocolate vanilla way of telling a story. But if you start to kind of mess with it and start breaking those parameters and taking it all apart and then putting it together again for your own needs, and then letting characters be a little more complicated, as long as it feels true, I think you get a somewhat more satisfying. It's almost like the difference between, again, that chocolate and vanilla flavor versus like a 7-course dinner of molecular gastronomy. Like in the right hands, something that can be a little more complicated and layered can stand the test of time.
Yeah. So first off, once again, I really like this idea of kind of these sequences that up until now I thought were just these rote, almost boring sequences of, a chase scene, a car scene, a fight scene, like again, I refer to the Bourne Identity, but it could be any of these sort of fighting or karate kind of movies.
Mission Impossible, the new ones, yeah.
Yeah, Mission Impossible. I really like this idea that even those scenes you could analyze by the rising and falling action, or the winning and losing action. Is another way to put it.
And what's on the like what's at stake? Like we want that object, but now the object is gone, or it's the stakes of a character's life hanging in the balance. Whatever it is, watching that pendulum swing back and forth, and how they time that. Really good scenes, those are like machines. Like they're machines. They know what they're doing with those.
Yeah, what do you mean by machines?
Well, like it's not like they're not winging it, right? I mean, you're not like, well, let's kind of just see where it goes. I mean, they're really like orchestrating, almost in the sense of it's a literal orchestra. Like they're really trying to keep all of those pieces together. It's not simply a push and pull, but it's also the timing of it and the perfect moments to sort of tease out like how the hero will win or the hero will lose. They are very purposefully articulated.
Yeah, and and this is to not only a lot of your points, but points of many writers, is that it's not as much. I would say the difference between a good sequence like that and a bad sequence like that is how much the rise and fall depends on the personality of the character as we know it to that point.
Yes.
So for instance, like Luke, when he's rescuing Leia, a little bit is that he's inexperienced at what he's doing.
Yeah.
He doesn't know, unlike Obi-Wan Kenobi, who senses the whole map of the Death Star, and so his challenges are different. Luke, runs into a room and suddenly and they're chasing after him, but suddenly there's no way to get there's emptiness. There's no way to jump to the other side. Right. Because he's inexperienced. He didn't know that.
Yeah, he doesn't know what to do next. And so his life is more in danger because he's kind of an idiot. I mean, like loosely speaking, he's kind of a dum-dum at that point.
Yeah, and that reflects what we know about him, his overall personality, which is that he rushes into things at that point. He's not as cool like he is in Return of the Jedi, and he has to deal with that.
Yeah, and then Han, for all of Han's experience, rushes into things just the same. He's more because he's brash and bold and doesn't care, but it's the same kind of problem. So, like I said, these are characters with the chaos of their convictions. They're just doing almost crazy stuff, true to their characters, but crazy stuff. They're just running into scenes and be like, and then they're running back out. And it's like, it's almost like Keystone Cops, but a little more serious.
Right, but even there's nuance because, like, let's say the same scene I just described about Luke, he gets there, and Leia even kind of makes fun of him, like, some hero you are, or whatever she says.
A little short to be a stormtrooper,
yeah, and Han, you kind of could see him in the same scene, but he would be more like, you wouldn't be able to tell that he's as flustered as Luke was, because he kind of he rushes into a scene, but into a situation, but sort of has faith that he'll work it out.
Yep.
So and that's kind of set up all along the way.
Yeah, good storytellers do that. Yeah.
Another thing is too, I'm curious about how you deal with this. Like, I see in some of your blog posts, you have very strong philosophies and opinions about life, politics, and so on. And obviously that comes out in your books, but there's always the danger that it could come out too much.
Yeah,
so then the book becomes about
preaching or
the topic rather than the character.
Yeah, and I think that's a huge danger. And I mean, it's something that I try not to do. I mean, even with Wanderers, which is a book, it has a certain point of view. I mean, I am still trying to have empathy for every character in it, even the ones that I don't think are good. And even some of the protagonists and main characters are people I certainly wouldn't agree with or wouldn't want to hang out with. They're different for me, and they have different points of view. And I think that's good to have that sort of mix of people and mix of point of view. I never want to preach to somebody. I don't want to hit them over the head with a message. I'm not even super concerned with a message. I think theme and stuff is one of those things that needs to live, in the sort of metaphor of a story as a house. Theme is one of those things that's behind the walls. It's plumbing. It's, conduits. It's not the decor. And I think theme is one of those things when it's best guessed at and not told. And also is something that's debatable, even debatable to the author themselves. Sometimes I've had books where people have told me things about the books, and I was like, oh, that totally makes sense. I didn't even think of that larger idea at play here. And they're like, and they kind of assumed I had written it that way, but I had not.
Like, what's an example from, well-known movies or TV or fiction where the theme is like for instance, Breaking Bad, the theme is not so subtle. Like, we know what the theme is.
Yeah.
He, as we spoke about earlier, what's something where the theme might be a little more subtle?
That's a good question. Breaking Bad, on the one hand, is, I think, some of the stuff is a little over the head. I also think once it makes the changes of, we know that he's not this guy anymore who, we know he's making a choice, right, as a character. It's not about the cancer. And once he's in remission, he's still doing what he's doing. I think the themes there get a little squirrelier with what the price of that is, and with the type of person that he is. I don't think it's necessarily about the good versus evil or the corruption of man or whatever it may be. I think you can have a more dicier interpretation, but I think you can probably have a dicey interpretation with anything. Hunger Games, all about sort of is it about revolution and the power of revolution? But obviously the revolution is compromised by the third book, and there's a lot of really sort of sticky, without spoiling anything, a lot of sticky sort of moral conundrums that come as a result of that and who people trust. Is it just that war is bad? I mean, that's a little too simple and obviously obvious, but not really enough of a theme. So, there's a lot of interesting sort of ways to sort of bat that back and forth.
Yeah, in the Hunger Games, for instance, what's so Katniss is the main character. What's her growth in the series, do you think?
If the whole series, all three books?
Yeah, or the first one or all three, whatever you want.
The first one is all about what? Her sort of just trying to save her sister. Like, family is everything. She'll sacrifice herself to do it. But by the end, she becomes this massive symbol of a revolution, and then the revolution, to some degree, turns on her. And so all of the things she thought she thought about her own allies becomes more complicated, and the people that she turns out to be essentially used. It's a pretty, and then the end of Mockingjay is rough as hell, and seems to definitely be saying something about children being the greatest sacrifice to war.
Yeah, and I guess there's also this other aspect. It's not so much theme, but it's almost like this Rubik's Cube like puzzle. How does she avoid killing anyone?
Right.
And so it becomes all these puzzles, particularly the final scene where I'm trying not to give away spoilers, but it's a little bit. But it comes across naturally. It doesn't come across as a series of Rubik's Cube style puzzles.
No, because they're based in her character and her morals. Not just it's not just plot.
Yeah. And this is related to everything we've spoken about, but you describe it in a different way in Kick-Ass Writer. Take Breaking Bad. We were talking about meaning Walter White, but all of them,
they all have
Hank, Jesse, his wife, they all have arcs where they're kind of moving forward on a personal level and have to make personal decisions. And I think that's kind of like a new thing in TV, not necessarily new in fiction, but this idea that across the arc of a season or a series, every single character has to move forward
and have a resolution in some way, even if a temporary one. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think like in the 80s and 90s even, every episode was standalone, so you wouldn't necessarily have, every character wasn't as important.
Yeah,
like usually it was the main character that was important.
And back then, it was always the joke was TV was all middle, right? Like you just sort of started Magnum PI. This is who Magnum PI is, and when you end the series, that's who Magnum PI is. Nothing's really changed. I mean, even something like prestige golden age TV like Sopranos. At the end of the day, nothing's changed for any of these characters. They're all kind of the same people they were. Mad Men, kind of these characters are who they are. They're making both narrative choices there and sort of character choices that say these characters are who they are and you can't change who you are. Every show is not that way. Breaking Bad, I think, does actually have some both growth and shifts. Better Call Saul, too, as a sequel to that or prequel to that, shows a character who is changing and morphing. He's not necessarily the same person at the beginning as he was at the end. Lost, I think Lost is a good example of a character, as much as a mess as it is in the middle, it does change who some of these people are by the end there. And it's almost like a meta-narrative about TV storytelling as to whether or not people change or what how their past impacts them and so on and so forth.
So yeah, tell me about that because Lost actually is my all-time favorite TV series.
Okay, good deal.
So like, how does like Jack's almost like, hey, I'm pro-science, you guys are anti-science. Like we sort of see these stories play out now. And then obviously towards the end, things change a little bit, but and until it's almost reversed, and then there's of course the surprises along the way with who we perceive to be on the other side of all of this.
The literal others.
So I guess actually I'm answering my own question, like I'm sort of seeing now. But okay, here's an interesting question which I saw in Lost, and I also see sometimes with Neil Gaiman books. Like, have you read the Sandman comic series?
Sure.
So
it's been a while, but yeah, sure.
Yeah, Lost and the Sandman remind me of similar challenges where they present more and more questions and plot twists about what's going on. And then you start to realize towards the end, how are they going to wrap these things up?
Well, part of the problem with Lost, and I can't speak to how Gaiman wrote Sandman, though you can maybe imagine it's in there because comics being comics. Lost didn't know when it was going to be allowed to end. As long as it kept being successful, like ABC wanted to just keep making it. And when you want to keep making something, that's that problem with all middle. You can never really get to an end. It's like, Zeno's paradox. You just keep getting halfway to an ending of a TV show and it never really gets to stop until they cancel it, at which point you have to sort of hastily cobble together an ending. So Lost kind of had like an ending figured out, but the middle just kept telescoping out. And they kept getting a season after season, and you had to sort of like put more things in, put more twists and turns because you can't not have twists and turns in Lost. So it becomes, you're building almost like a labyrinth, and that labyrinth gets a little more difficult to traverse. And suddenly, the end, which actually I love the end of Lost.
But by the way, I love the end of Lost as well.
I know. I don't know if we're in the minority there, though. Every time I talk about it, everyone's like, "I agree with you." So I don't think people dislike the ending as much as people think they do. I think it's a pitch perfect end to that show, actually.
Yeah, and then of course, did you see the mini 3-minute sequel where
No, I don't think I did.
Hurley was the new guy,
the new guy,
and they have him
right,
and they have him going around on the earth, kind of doing things. The addition of that 3-minute sequel kind of nicely, to me, tied it up a little bit.
Encapsulates the whole thing.
Yeah.
There you go.
But all of this, the idea that each character now has they're going through their arc of the hero or Freytag's pyramid or whatever you want to call it. I think in Kick-Ass Writer you have a nice way of saying it, which is that villains have mothers.
Yeah.
So it's not like Darth Vader is just this, archetype of evil.
Yeah.
He literally has a mother, and that makes you look at him in a different way. And if you think of each character having a mother, that's like a useful technique.
Yeah, it humanizes them. Even as inhuman as they are, there's something human about them. They came from somewhere. They are who they are. I mean, a lot of especially in fiction, I don't know about real life, sometimes I think it's not true, but in fiction, even the worst people often have a conviction, right? They have the convictions to back that up. They see themselves as the hero of their own story. In real life, sometimes I think people can be just evil and terrible, but in fiction, we have to do more. We have to make that work.
I wonder, do you think in real life? So I think narrative nonfiction works a lot like fiction, at least in terms of the story. It's still a story. You're still dealing with characters that are not you, but that you could relate to, and so similar things have to happen in reading a narrative nonfiction.
Sure.
Do you think there are characters that are purely evil? And I know there's a narrative about current day politics where it's easy to say you have 80 million people saying one side's purely evil and another 80 million people saying the other side's purely evil, and they might both be right, they might be both wrong. One side might be right, one side might be wrong.
One side is definitely not good in this. There's some shit going down, but I mean, in terms of it's tricky because in fiction it is useful to think of everyone has mothers, and so we should try to understand them. And I don't think that's necessarily untrue with our fellow humans, but there also comes a point when you can over-humanize something and be like, well, if I excuse an evil act because they have a mother, because they think they're doing the right thing, and it can be useful for helping you understand where it comes from, but not necessarily useful if you're trying to figure out how to stop it.
Yeah. So but I'm gonna challenge you on this point.
Okay,
take Donald Trump as an example, and let's just say it's nighttime at the White House. Everything's settled down for the day. It's just Trump and Melania, and she hates his guts for
I'm sure she's,
a million.
I'm sure she's 1,000 miles away from him emotionally or physically at that point.
Right, and he has everybody in the world attacking him, correctly or incorrectly. Let's even say correctly.
Yeah.
He's everyone in the world attacking him, but he still wants a little bit of love and a little bit of human contact.
Sure.
How would you knowing that as exposition?
Yeah.
How would you continue that as just even like a short story? This is just one night in the White House.
I wouldn't, because I couldn't do it. Not with him. He's just too. I can't even imagine. I mean, everything we have seen of him, if we're to paint him as a character, right, not just necessarily a person, but like a character. Every character aspect we have of him is somewhere between brutish and clownish. So his attempts to get love are not going to go well. They're going to be either forced or comical or awkward or something. There's going to be something in there that, first of all, I wouldn't want to write because I'll feel gross afterward. But yeah, I don't know what you would, how.
But like put your own needs in that character with his background. So for instance, I'm just imagining this and you and I probably feel the same about all these things, but I'm imagining it as like, he's just been attacked over and over and over. He's just been impeached. He's, some people are telling the truth about him. Some people are lying about him. who knows? And he doesn't know how to break through to Melania. So he just says, listen, there's things I can't apologize for. There's things that have so much ugly history between the two of us, but I just don't know what to do this moment emotionally to move forward. Can I talk to you?
I guess, but you're envisioning definitely a fictional version of who I imagine him to be. Having dealt with people who I consider to be sort of malignant narcissists in the past, I don't necessarily think it goes that kindly for him. I think it's usually he wants what he wants, and when he doesn't get it, he gets it somewhere else.
And so, like, for instance, on a night like this, he might just say, well, screw everybody. They're all wrong. I'm just going to go to sleep, and tomorrow we're going to kick ass.
Well, yeah, and he'll go and he'll tweet about it or tweet anger in a different direction because he doesn't have a grasp of his emotions well. I mean, if you want to humanize him, that's probably where it comes from, is that there's something possibly literally wrong. I don't necessarily mean in a demented capacity from his age, but he's obviously incapable of ever apologizing. He's obviously incapable of ever not taking credit for something. And so that comes from somewhere, either abuse, and there's certainly evidence that his father was no good person, and I can't imagine how his mother was. So that comes from somewhere. Either that or it's a simple chemical imbalance, and he's a man trapped in his own prison. That's as close as I think you can get to sort of humanizing and writing him as a sort of a fictional construct and trying to get to the heart of it. But when it comes to this sort of situation, it comes down to the thing of, like, I don't know what that gives us outside of a narrative exercise.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because what you're almost saying is that because he can't find any way to connect emotionally, and that might be this narcissistic quality caused by various things, his only outlet at 2 a.m. to fill this hole is to get on Twitter and get the dopamine hit of 100,000 people liking, MAGA exclamation point.
Right. And he gets to maintain in his own head that he's the sort of king, and Melania rejected him. Well, what does she know? Blah blah blah. Or what do the media know? Or what does the Democrats know? No one understands. And there's no self-reflection. There's no like, well, what if I change? What if I change who I am? Or what if I try a different tactic? Or what if I compromise? That's never the thing that reaches his mind. It's never like, what if I do a different thing? It's always like, well, I'm going to keep. He's the classic version of like, well, I've dug myself into a hole. I guess I better keep digging. And so there's never a point when he's like, well, what if I try to climb out? Because that's too much effort. And I don't just mean from like him being lazy. I mean from that sort of narcissistic character perspective, that to have to climb out of the hole would have to admit you didn't mean to dig yourself in there. And so you keep digging down because that's what you are trying to tell the world that you did on purpose.
Yeah, because it seems like if I were him, if let's say he's just a fictional character and I'm thinking this story, like after he had coronavirus and comes back, so he's moving forward, but then he's held back, I would maybe come out and say something like, look, a lot of people are dying, but also a lot of people are hungry. And listen, I will talk to Nancy Pelosi on the phone or wherever she wants to meet, and let's solve this.
There was nothing humble about that. There was no moment of reflection. I mean, like, Reagan, for whatever you think about Reagan got shot and changed his tune on guns. Better for worse, that shouldn't be the thing it takes maybe to change your mind on a thing is, but he faced it and it happened and he, was changed by it. This is not a person who has changed in any way, given anything we've seen. And so, not to get too in the weeds of the politics, but it's interesting to me that his sort of arc, and I say this knowing that there's an election coming up and I don't know when this airs or what we'll know at that point when it does air. If he is not elected again, I think he sure could have been. And it's going to be that sort of classic tragic character flaw. That narcissism is his tragic flaw, right? His Achilles heel, because he walked into office and they had for him a pandemic book. Like, here it is, do this, follow this map. And he didn't have to do anything. He could have even taken total credit for it. He could have been like, yeah, I came up with this book. I wrote this book. This is our plan. And we're just going to do it. And he could have done everything. And he could have still remained the sort of horrible narcissistic man that he was, and still continued doing whatever he wanted to do. If he had just followed that playbook, he probably would have been reelected in a landslide, because people would have been like, well, this one overarching terrible thing in our lives, he handled it. He did, and he was the good guy, and he figured it out. He could have spun up all kind of lies about how he invented this thing or whatever it was, but because it was stamped by other people, especially Obama, like the chief sort of like, tragic nemesis of him, he views him as this this sort of wretched figure, this ghost haunting him all his life. He could not possibly accept that there was a plan to fix this problem that didn't start with him, and so he rejected it entirely. And then because he has no plan, and here we are. And his tragic flaw is something we're all sort of breathing the same air he is. We're all suffering the tragic flaw along with him.
Right. And it's funny, if he had moved his character forward, he still might have won in a landslide.
Yeah.
I mean, for all we know, we don't know what's going to happen.
True.
Maybe he will win in a landslide.
Knock on all the wood, but yeah.
But it would have been something that would have made more, you could have connected the dots more easily.
Oh my gosh, I love these clothes. Mizzen and Main. That's Mizzen and Main. It really is the most comfortable work clothes. Travel clothes. I had to travel this whole week. I'm traveling for a week and a half, and I just took Mizzen and Main clothes with me. Close out 2023 in style with comfortable, breathable, packable, and machine washable pieces from Mizzen and Main. As you wrap up your year-end goals, enjoy a Mizzen and Main dress shirt that you can wear confidently. I like that they've very, very just nice, solid colors. I don't really like to get all fancy in patterns and everything, although they do have some pattern shirts, but very comfortable clothes, stretchable pants. It's just super comfortable, but they look professional, and you can wear them casually or professionally. I like some of their flannel shirts or untuck shirts. I love untuck. I never tuck in. So again, whether you're shopping for a special someone or giving yourself the gift you really want, I just buy myself gifts. Mizzen and Main is the perfect gift for any guy who works, travels, and cares about looking and feeling great. As you could tell by my many photos across the internet, I care about looking fantastic. I'm practically a model. And let's be honest, every guy loves to look great. So again, shop now at mizzenandmain.com and save 20% when you spend $130 or more using promo code James. That's promo code James at Mizzen and Main, Mizzen and Main.com.
Okay, another, and I hope you don't mind. I'm asking about all these. I'm darting back and forth between all these writing concepts that you talk about. You mentioned if you jump too fast into waters too deep, the audience drowns. So if you go like right into the action, sometimes that's not good. Although like a James Bond movie always starts with some intense scene of action, but we all know that's not really the story hasn't begun yet. We're just kind of establishing the qualifications of James Bond at the beginning of every movie.
Right, and we also start every movie already knowing who James Bond is at its core.
Right.
And they've done a little more work these days to actually make him more of a character, like give him a little more of an arc, which is unusual because he used to be the character who never changed. He changed the world didn't change him. He was that heroic sort of mode. But now he's a little bit changed. He gets more damaged. He has a little more of a growth sort of a cycle to him. But even in those jumping in, you can always they create easy stakes. Like that person is a bomb and they're going to blow up all those people. And we can kind of easily, emotionally, viscerally understand that it's maybe wouldn't be satisfying as a long-term thing, but in a 2-hour film, it kind of work. But yeah, you have some danger as a storyteller in sort of bum rushing the audience with a lot of, stimuli, like, in terms of the action scene with, you're trying to give them something to hold on to. Everybody needs handholds in a story, and those handholds are usually the reasons we care, and characters are the reasons we care. And if you don't give them those things, you don't give them a few traits to sort of believe in and a few character things to believe in. It's just like being thrown around a room without. It's like, it's like a trampoline. You're like, well, I'm bouncing. Like something's happening, but I don't know. I don't have any emotional investment in this movement.
Yeah. So like a few years ago, I read this novel. I forget the name of it. It was by the author his name's David Levine. He's a co-writer on the show Billions, and it was the very first chapter. A little boy is riding a bicycle, and a car kind of hits him, and the people get out of the car and take him and leave the bicycle, and that's the first chapter. And the whole book's like basically, there's this child, sex trafficking ring, and he's being kidnapped. Is that too fast to get into it? That felt normal for me in the sense that I got really invested right away. Like, I hope they can save this boy.
Yeah, of course. And I assume,
even though we didn't know anything about the characters yet.
It probably gave you something about him, right? Something in the way he was acting, or, you probably got a sense of who the character was, just to leave it a little bit. Like, it doesn't need to be much. It's just usually a tiny percentage, even in the way they look or the way they act. If they're humming a song, or if they have a certain kind of decor or something on their T-shirt, just these little signals that you're like, okay, I kind of have a picture of who this person is in my mind. Like I said, it's a little easier in film and TV because you have so many visual hooks on which to sort of hang, your hat. Whereas in a book, it's all what you have written. And if you don't write it, you can't see it. Like, I don't have to, in a film and TV script, I don't have to write, and then there's a tree, or here's what's on his T-shirt. People are all handling that. Like, there's this massive amount of information visually on screen that you don't get in a novel.
Yeah. What do you think about the idea of, and we've talked about this a bunch of times, the idea that there's really no new stories. So what ends up happening is there's kind of a bunch of, to use the word, tropes to start things off. So again, like, for instance, The Bourne Identity, he starts off with amnesia, which happens in quite a few classic stories. Yeah. Like, I don't know if you ever read the Amber Chronicles.
Oh, Zelazny. Yeah, of course. It's been years, but sure.
Yeah, so whatever his name is, I can't even remember his name, starts off with amnesia.
Right.
And it takes a long time for him to get over the amnesia, but it's the same thing with the Bourne Identity. Or like Mad Men, there's this concept that he has you don't really know his real identity.
Yeah, it leaves a lot of little mysteries, little hooks.
Or in other stories, the main character, you start to realize, oh, this guy can live forever.
Right.
And so that's the trope. And so, and then always it sort of seems added to that particular trope is that, all of a sudden he finds out there's someone else that can live forever who's a lot older than them.
Right.
And so like an Interview with the Vampire, it's like
or
that.
Highlander, sure, absolutely.
By Anne Rice. And so I wonder, and I love these tropes, that oh, here's another live forever one, or here's another one where this guy's actually a god, but he's been thrown down to Earth for some reason. So that ranges from the comic book Thor to Gaiman's American Gods to whatever. And then, of course, every legal thriller by John Grisham is a young, idealistic lawyer. Yeah, and he wants to help people. But he's also attracted to the money, and then that tears him apart and creates the story. So I almost wonder if there's an encyclopedia of these tropes because they're all great.
Oh, TV tropes. Look at the website, TV tropes. It gets into the weeds with some of them, but it handles all the big stuff. Yeah, you can literally click on a trope, and it'll tell you a lot of the places it shows up in. It's super great resource for everybody.
I found like one time I was writing something. I wanted to write a screenplay, and I wrote something that I thought was interesting to me, but then I realized I was too in love with the concept and didn't think enough about the character. Yeah. And this is a point you bring up a lot, which is that really the characters are driving.
It's everything. They're why we're there.
Everything. Yeah. There's no plot without the character. The characters are the plot, which I think is what people miss.
Yeah. World building is meaningless without characters. Yeah. Twists and turns meaningless without character. Yeah.
So how'd you get to do Star Wars? It's described a little bit, in various places, but what's your story? Like, how'd you get to do a Star Wars novel, which is like a dream come true for about 1 billion people?
I tweeted about it, which is not usually how you get a job. And it May not be again, but no, I knew there were new films coming, and I expected there to be new books. So I just said, I could totally rock a Star Wars novel, and I'd love to write one. And people I knew, I was fortunate enough to be connected to people who, separately from each other, actually kind of moved that request into the places it needed to be. And next thing I know, I was meeting with an editor at Del Rey at New York Comic Con, and they asked me to write up a synopsis, and I was the only other one doing it, so I wasn't even competing against anyone. And next thing I knew, I was writing a Star Wars novel.
Did you have to pitch an idea that first meeting?
Well, they had, not the first meeting, they told me that there was a timeline. Like it had to be set in the year after Return of the Jedi, building up to this thing called the Battle of Jakku. And that's literally all they had. They had no story. They didn't know what would fill that time period. They just knew it couldn't contain too many, if any, of the main characters. It had to be new characters. So then they said, we'll get back to us with a story idea.
So what were your first thoughts on story ideas?
Well, they initially were like, well, what if we did something that was more like World War Z, the zombie novel by Max Brooks, where it's just this sort of piecemeal kind of like just a patchwork of narrative, set after the fall of the Empire. And I thought that's really cool, but it's also like, if I'm really greedy, and if I want to write a Star Wars novel, I want it to feel like a Star Wars novel. And that doesn't feel Star Warsy to me. That feels like something else. So, but I was also greedy enough that I still like that idea enough that I put it in the Aftermath books as these interludes. I'm like, well, I'm going to drop in these interludes that take us to different parts of the galaxy and cover different sort of bases, media, religion, things like that, like, war and Clone Wars, like just picking all these sort of characters and moments out of all of the stuff I loved and sort of giving us that view of the galaxy and the fall of the Empire from different perspectives, but then also still telling a more traditional, cue the theme music Star Wars story.
Do you think they'll ever, I assume, I imagine there's always the hope that they repurpose it in some way, like TV series, movie, whatever,
I know they've popped up in some of the games. Battlefront has a bit of the story of Aftermath. Squadrons has a character from Aftermath. There's rumors that The Mandalorian will have a character from Aftermath.
Really?
But it's usually, Cobb Vanth from one of the interludes, who stole Boba Fett's armor. So I don't know. I mean, that's cool. I mean, also from a selfish perspective, like I get nothing for that. Like that's pure ego. I get no financial reward, and I certainly don't own any part of it. And so if they do it, that's cool and great. But also then you're like, well, they're getting rich off my ideas, which is, I always understand that's the point of, you write IP, someone else is always getting rich off your stuff. But
what do you think of The Mandalorian?
I love it.
Yeah, it's great.
It feels like a different kind of Star Wars while also being old school Star Wars at the same time.
Yeah, it has the flavor that they always used to describe Star Wars, which is like this marriage of science fiction and Western. The Mandalorian totally feels like that. Totally feels like it.
And everything's rusty and crusty, and it's one of the things that the prequels sort of bothered me. Everything was so shiny. Some of that came down to CGI, but and I understood the point. That was literally the point. It was a world that hadn't yet, quote unquote, fallen, or a galaxy that hadn't fallen. So everything was like shiny chrome looking good. But to me, Star Wars is always that, rust bucket, Millennium Falcon. The Millennium Falcon to me is the perfect metaphor for Star Wars, because it's a sort of a piece of junk that flies beautifully and you love it, right? It's like Star Wars is a hot mess. Like it doesn't follow any of its own rules. It's like it's quote unquote science is dubious at best. It's a wonderful mess, and that's what I love about it. Like it feels like the Millennium Falcon. It feels like someone built this thing together out of space junk and sort of kicked it into space, and then it goes high, and then it's like the fastest flying, craziest thing that you've ever seen.
Yeah, and I don't know if this is, again, I'm going to use the phrase trope. I don't know why I hate that word and I keep using it, but I feel like it's a new word, which it's like synergy. It like never existed before, and then suddenly it's everywhere. But I like this idea of like everyone's got a code. So there's the dark side, there's the good side of the Force, the light side, whatever, and the Mandalorian has his code, and that seems like always something exciting. Like you respect someone who lives by a code.
Yeah, and that's actually one of those things that comes to that like sort of heroic characters, right? The ones who change the world but are not changed by the world. They usually have a code and live by. James Bond, Sherlock Holmes, they have codes. These are like iconic characters who follow almost almost like a program. They follow a certain kind of moral program.
Yeah, but I guess if you think about all the 9 movies of Star Wars, it almost becomes that the code, and you refer to this a little bit in Kick-Ass Character when you say places are characters, but it's almost like codes or places are characters, and it's almost like codes are characters. So like by the end, The Last Jedi, the code has become gray.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, the code changes. The code can shift, sure.
So
as it should, maybe. Yeah, ideally.
Yeah. So what's next for you? I feel like you've done everything. I mean, just to tell you, like in the early 90s, I got obsessed with, I wanted to be a writer. And so I was writing nonstop. And of course, like anything, everything I wrote was horrible, but I thought everything was great. So I would submit it everywhere and get rejected everywhere. And I even wrote like comic book scripts and, so you've managed to persist and do everything that I always dreamed of. I write a lot of narrative nonfiction now.
Sure,
and,
of course.
And I always try to, I think what helped me build an audience was that I took the structure of a story and applied it to my narratives, like my own personal story. But it's still, so sometimes people would ask me, is this real or is this not real? Because I would use like these classic ideas of fiction storytelling.
Yeah, you're telling it like a story, like a proper story.
Right. And so maybe one day I'd get back to it. But
sure.
I always found it much easier to write about things that actually happened to me, because then it's easier for me to draw upon my emotions and make it, and expose my vulnerabilities rather than making up some. But like you've really done, comic books, movies, novels, games, like the whole, and different types of novels. Like what's next for you?
This was the first year, 2020 is the first year I didn't have anything released. And it was a mix of reasons, from pandemic to election. I had a novel that was scheduled to come out, and the publisher, wisely, as it turns out, I think flinched because it was set to come out this month in October. And they were like, it gets real hard to get, media attention and any attention at all when there's an election year, especially an election that has to do with Donald Trump.
Yeah.
So, 2016, it was very hard to get through the noise to have any promotion for a book. So they moved that to January. So 2021 comes out, and I have 3 things coming out. And I have a series of, used to do these like motivational, insane tweets in the morning. So Rizzoli Publishing wanted to do a book of those. So I have an artist, the wonderful Natalie Metzger, who is doing all this weird sort of monstrous art, this cartoon art to go with my tweets. And so that'll be a book coming out in April. And then July sees my first real sort of horror novel, The Book of Accidents. And then
what's that about? Can I ask?
I don't have a good tagline for it yet, but it's sort of a haunted house story that's not a haunted house story, that has to do with sort of breaking cycles of abuse. And there's a serial killer, and there's dimensional hopping. It's crazy. It's a strange book, but hopefully it'll work, and we'll figure out how to tell that story or how to pitch it. And then in October, I have a middle grade sort of funny, scary book, funny horror book coming out called Dust and Grim, which is, a little more classic vampires, werewolves, fairies kind of book. And
it's funny, brother. You're right about 2020. Like this was the first year I really had nothing come out in about 20 years.
Weird, isn't
it? Yeah, because of between pandemic and Trump and the election. So I also have 3 things coming out in 2021.
Oh, what do you got? What's coming out?
Well, I have kind of a motivational book based on the idea that I've had to switch professions quite a bit.
Sure, yeah.
And whenever you switch professions, as you know, because in your own way, you've had to switch from one thing to another very quick. It's hard to, once you switch, the first thing that happens is everybody tells you, you can't do that. You gotta, everybody else started at 18 doing this, and you're 50. Yeah. How are you gonna?
Yeah, you're not allowed.
You're not allowed. You gotta stand in line and wait your turn. So it's basically about this concept of you should do what everybody tells you can't do. Follow your passions is the saying. And but there's also ways to originally, be original and learn. You don't have to follow the 10,000 hour rule of trying to be the best. There's other ways to do it and rise to the top 1% of your field so you can monetize.
Yeah.
And so that first book's about that. Another one's about, I'm doing with a guy who's a well-known voice in the African American community and Black Lives Matter and so on. So we have this idea of it's going to shake the world about how our understanding of this, I hope, and then just other random things. But
nice.
I'm excited about it all. But
here's the 2021, right? Let's hope
2021. Hopefully there won't be Civil War distracting us. We can't publish your book until after the Civil War is over.
I know. I'm waiting for that, and you're like, well, I think that's fair, but oh no.
Yeah, and so and then there was one other thing I wanted to ask you. I always forget in the middle of podcasts, which is bad. I've done like 1,000 podcasts, and I always get nervous for each one.
I think that's cool though, because that means you care. I mean, that's like it's real for you.
Yeah, well, I always approach a podcast like I want to learn, and so even when I write something, I always ask myself, what am I learning from what I'm writing? And I get the sense that you do that as well.
Yeah, I mean, both for selfish reasons, like how can I put this in a book, and also for that just sort of moral growth, like I want to be a better person and learn things and impact the world in a more useful and better way.
And one other kind of slogan I use for myself is I usually don't want to hit publish on something unless I'm afraid of what people will think of me, because then I know I'm challenging some comfort zone that I haven't challenged before.
Yeah, it usually indicates you're either in an interesting place or a dangerous place, and sometimes they can be the same thing.
Yeah. Okay, so I remember the two final things I want.
All right, let's hear it.
So first off, you always do this 5 things I learned from writing X, and you invite these other authors on who've written like different novels. What have you learned from their 5 things over time? You've done like a lot of these now.
I've learned that, I mean, this sounds cliche, but no one tells stories the same way. No one knows how to write a book.
That's a great quote.
And that's good. That's a really good thing. No one knows how to write a book. And every book is its own thing. And I think, writers internalize their own mythology, right? We all this is how I do things. And I've done this myself. I get up at 6 in the morning and I get coffee and I write by 7 and I've got to write 2,000 words and it's ass and chair time and whatever you tell your narrative as to how you write books. But then inevitably a book comes along and reminds you that you don't know any of that. None of that's true. The mythologies are just that. They're just myths. And every book demands a new way to be written and challenges your way. And I can see it in these 5 things that everybody's sort of they're all coming up with lessons that are their own lessons. If I wrote that same book, I wouldn't have learned those same things, and I wouldn't have even written the book the same way. And I think that's really a value add. I don't think in any way that that's a problem. And I think it's really changed over time my approach as to how I administer writing advice. And Damn Fine Story, begins with a whole prologue warning, whatever you want to call it, that's about writing advice is bullshit. But bullshit can fertilize. That's the whole thing. It just because it's bullshit doesn't mean it's bad, but it does mean you can't take this as sacred, handed on a tablet from the mountain kind of a thing. So,
oh my God, I got to steal that quote. Bullshit can fertilize.
Bullshit can fertilize. Yeah, writing advice is bullshit.
And then the other thing that I really admire about your career is that you have tried everything. There's always this aspect of being creative in the domain. So, for instance, understanding the art of storytelling and using your philosophy about storytelling, including what you just said, to make good stories. But then there's the other aspect, which is you have to understand the field. So who are the agents? Who are the publishers? What are the deals? How do you negotiate? But you've played around with this as well. You've launched books off of Kickstarter. You've self-published. You've done all sorts of things. And you have to do that in today's world. You have to understand the field in a very nuanced way to succeed and make money. And how are you feeling in general about books and reading? Do you feel people read less? Do you feel people read differently, or are they obsessed? Are young people now, instead of reading, science fiction novels, they're going on TikTok for 7 hours a day?
I don't know. I mean, given that I know some of the biggest money is in middle grade, and the reason the money is there is because kids are reading. And young adult. I mean, young adult was a profoundly successful quote unquote genre. I mean, I don't know if there's really a genre in the strictest sense, but age range of books. And so as much as there's, social media and TikTok and whatever else, like, the kids are definitely reading. I can't speak to adults. I feel like if I had to guess, and I don't necessarily have the stats to back this up, I feel like there's probably fewer adults reading books now than there were 20 years ago, but there's also better ways to bring those readers together. Because I mean, at the end of the day, someone like Stephen King, people aren't selling copies like like the big hit authors sold in the 80s or 90s. The books aren't selling that way. But you're also seeing maybe more books produced, and maybe books by more marginalized communities produced, which is good. You're starting to finally see that, especially in science fiction and fantasy. I feel like science fiction and fantasy is at a better vanguard for doing more interesting things with narrative than maybe you can see in some other places. So, I think there's, even if maybe there's not 100% success to become like that meteoric, I'm like the Motley Crue, of an author, that huge, hit book kind of thing. I think you also have more opportunity to do more things and braver things and stranger things with the books you're writing and the books that are getting out there.
What do you mean by braver things?
Well, like I said, not just giving stories to and letting marginalized communities tell those stories, people who are maybe not necessarily expected to or as easily allowed into the space. Finding publishing becoming more inclusive, though imperfectly so, obviously, and it has a lot of miles to go before it sleeps. I do think you're seeing a lot more interesting tales being told, and also even just in terms of the form and in terms of genre mashing and things that are unexpected, things you would not have ever seen 20 years ago. Gideon the Ninth, lesbian necromancer novel. It's like, you in the 90s, I don't know, that would have been a little more, what? How dare, oh my God, Poppy Z. Bright type stuff. It wouldn't have been.
I used to love Poppy Z. Bright.
Poppy Bright is wonderful. Yeah. So, I think it's good to see more of that, and kind of breaking those walls down and sort of changing our perceptions of what books can and should be, and continuing to do it that way is powerful.
And also platforms like Kickstarter or Patreon or Gumroad. Like there's a lot of people, I know friends of mine who they will not write a novel or a book unless Simon & Schuster is going to publish it. Like they're just grown up thinking this is the way to do it, and then they're going to win the Nobel Prize, no problem.
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on your goal. If the goal is to sort of tell that story, then I don't see why you wouldn't at least consider things like Kickstarter. Well, Kickstarter is tricky if you're, for lack of a better term, not a known quantity, because some people think Kickstarter is like, or any sort of crowdfunding means that they're going to crowd surf you to the stage, but you need a crowd first. Like you have to have your crowd in place to get you to the stage. Otherwise it's like, I got $40, like that's it, and then the campaign dies. But self-publishing on a place like Amazon, though Amazon is also fraught because it's become so much of a juggernaut that it's almost more of a juggernaut than traditional publishing is, in terms of, like, at least with traditional publishing, you have all these publishers sort of bouncing off each other and you have a lot of option. But the more that Amazon dominates the self-publishing field with Kindle and ebooks in general, it gets harder and harder to go outside of that and to do differently. I mean, I've had actually a lot of success selling directly through PayHip, and which is a Gumroad-like service. So
PayHip?
Yeah, PayHip.
Wow, I never heard of that.
Yeah, they just deliver directly, and it's nice. And you get a large chunk of the royalties as opposed to Amazon. But it's still obviously viable. So I think thinking about all those things, and also just having it, trying to understand them all, just in case one of those options dies on you. And that's true in genre, in method and path to publishing. It's true in medium. Just sort of having your tentacles sort of out there and being aware of everything. Because it's like someone who writes like, well, I write mysteries for Simon & Schuster always. And then if the mystery genre is no longer interesting, or Simon & Schuster goes belly up for some reason, then what are you going to do? It's harder to change gears. The more, it's like why branding is really dangerous for authors, because branding is like it's like livestock branding. It's the type of thing that they sear into your ass to sort of make sure you stay where you're supposed to stay. Whereas if you, from the outset, have a more diffuse, diverse brand of like, well, I can do all of this stuff. I'm not just the guy who writes, this particular niche of mystery novel. It means from the outset you can kind of stick and move a little more interestingly. And if one door closes, you've already opened 10 other doors for yourself that you can dart through one of them.
Yeah, I really believe that as well. So, Chuck Wendig, there's so many things I could recommend that you put out. Like, first off, for anybody who's a writer, your blog, Terrible Minds, and all the advice you give in it, and all the advice other authors give in it, and this is related to, Kick-Ass Writer and Damn Fine Story, like these books that you've written about writing. I just love it all. And then the Aftermath series, your book, The Wanderer or Wanderers. I haven't read the Miriam Black series, which we were referring to earlier, but I'm going to order them right now and read them.
Oh, thank you. Hope you enjoy it.
It sounds. I love the concept. So
it's a full series. It goes from start to finish, and it's a full series. So you can be confident that it ends.
Excellent. And you should write a sequel to Lost. Like I just heard a rumor the other day they might have a sequel series to Lost.
Oh, no kidding.
That would be the best thing ever.
That'd be cool. I'd be into that.
All right, Chuck. Thank you. So, is there anything else you want to promote or anything?
No, that'll be it. That's it. I'm good. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. I really super appreciate it. I've been a big fan for a long time.
Thanks, man.
The McNugget Buddies are back. But this time, they got a fresh look as part of the new Kerwin Frost box at McDonald's. We're talking all new buddies, dressed head to toe in the freshest fits, all designed by the artist Kerwin Frost. So when you order the Kerwin Frost box with your choice of 10-piece McNuggets or a Big Mac, you'll get one of the flyest McNugget Buddies to go with it. Think you can collect them all? Ba-da-ba-ba-ba. I'm loving it.
At participating McDonald's for a limited time while supplies last.